Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History. I'm Larry Schweikart, your host, and also I am the co-author of Patriot's History of the United States with Michael Allen, now in its 40th printing and its fifth edition. This is the 15th anniversary edition cover behind me, but it's the fifth edition. And I'm working on in essence, a 20th anniversary edition, an extra chapter and some material that will go within the book that I hope to have out by the end of summer. By the way, if you haven't seen it yet, I have now available my autobiography on Amazon. It is called The Rhythm of History, and I think you'll find it interesting. I went from son of a ranch manager to a rock and roll drummer who opened for Steppenwolf, the James Gang, Savoy Brown, played some pretty big venues, to a graduate student where I had all sorts of interesting experiences, including introducing William F. Buckley Jr. and being the driver for a Reagan event in which I drove Beverly Sills and Merle Haggard and the Outlaws up to the event. That was something. To being a college professor, to being an aerobics instructor. There's quite a bit on that in there. To being an author, and then to being an advisor to a president, and then to being a film producer and other stuff along the way. So I think you'll like that. You can check out the link below here at Amazon, and it's called The Rhythm of History. Now, as always, I'm reading from the 15th anniversary edition. As I always say, the page numbers may be different if you have an earlier edition, but for the most part, with a very few exceptions, the headers will always be the same because we try to maintain the headers throughout, even if we change some stuff within the text. And we just finished God and the Americans, a long section on religion in the early republic. And so we're going to shift gears now and go to Beyond the Endless Mountains on page 108. And this is about America's westward migration. The end of the American Revolution marked the beginning of a great migration to the west across the Appalachian Mountains. The migrants followed four major routes. Pennsylvania Germans and Scots Irish moved south down the Great Valley of the Appalachians to settle in western Virginia and North Carolina. The Wilderness Road, blazed by Daniel Boone in 1775, led some of them into Kentucky and the Bluegrass region via the Cumberland Gap. One traveler described this route as, quote, the longest, blackest, hardest road in America. Carolinians traversed the mountains by horseback and wagon train until they found the Tennessee River, following its winding route up to the Ohio River, then ascending the Cumberland south to the Nashville region. But the most common river route and the most popular route to the west was the Ohio River. Migrants made the arduous journey over Forbes Road through the Alleghenies to Pittsburgh. There they built or bought a flatboat, purchased a copy of Zadok Kramer's river guide, The Western Navigator, and launched their crafts and their fortunes into La Belle Riviere. If the weather and navigation depth was good and fortune smiled upon them, the trip from Pittsburgh to Louisville took 7 to 10 days. These times, travel times, are just astounding to modern Americans. I mean, 7 to 10 days to go from Pittsburgh to Louisville, which today you can make in less than 8 hours driving, something like that, less. If you drive like me, less. So it's just really kind of amazing. During the decade following the Revolution, tens of thousands of pioneers moved southwest of the Ohio River. Harrodsburg, Boonesboro, Louisville, and Lexington in Kentucky were joined by Watauga and Nashville settlements in the northeastern and central portions of what is now the state of Tennessee. Or if you're from Tennessee. Pioneers like Daniel Boone played an irreplaceable role in cutting the trails, establishing relations with Native Americans, or defeating them if it came to a fight, and setting up early forts from which towns and commercial centers could emerge. Daniel Boone, 1734 to 1820, had traveled from Pennsylvania, where his family bucked local Quakers by marrying its daughters outside the Society of Friends, through Virginia, North Carolina, then finally to explore Kentucky. Crossing the famed Cumberland Gap in 1769, Boone's first expedition into the raw frontier resulted in his parties being robbed of all of its furs. Boone returned a few years later to establish a settlement that bears his name. When the Revolutionary War reopened hostilities in Kentucky, Boone was captured by Shawnee Indians and remained a prisoner for months, then had to endure a humiliating court-martial for the episode. Nevertheless, few individuals did more to open the early West to British and American settlement than Daniel Boone. So we have one of, when we originally wrote the book, one of very many sidebars. And these are inserts, single space, smaller print, that had a lot more detail on many of the topics that we thought were important, but we couldn't quite fit them into the narrative. And most of those, we saw how did Columbus kill all the Indians and now Daniel Boone, but most of these got cut because we simply didn't have the room to keep them. As a result, they are on the Wild World of History website. If you look in the blogs, most of them are someplace on the blogs. They are free. Search them at your leisure, but we haven't gotten rid of them. They're still there. So, excuse me. So I'm going to read from this sidebar, Daniel Boone, civilizer or misanthrope. As Revolutionary era Americans began to move beyond the endless mountains into the frontier of Ohio and Mississippi valleys, they followed the trails blazed by Daniel Boone. Stories of Daniel Boone's exploits as a hunter, pathfinder, Indian fighter, war hero, and community builder loom large in the myth of the American West. Many of these stories are true. It is interesting to note, however, that the stories of Daniel Boone often portray him in two completely different ways, either as a wild, uncivilized frontiersman or as a leader of the vanguard aiming to tame and civilize the wild frontier. Was Daniel Boone running from civilization or was he bringing it with him? Was he a misanthrope or a civilizer or both? And I think to a large degree could say the same about Davy Crockett. He's portrayed in these two different ways as the wild frontiersman who killed him a bar when he was only 3 and who fought at the Alamo, to Congressman David Crockett. Back to Boone. Born in Pennsylvania in 1734, Daniel Boone became a hunter at 12 years of age, soon staying away from home years at a time on long hunts. He worked his way down the eastern slope of the Appalachians before plunging into the unexplored regions westward. From 1767 to 69, he blazed the wilderness trail through the Cumberland Gap to Kentucky Bluegrass region, where in 1775 he established Boonesboro, an outpost for his family and friends to settle the new West. He was subsequently captured and adopted by Shawnee Indians in 1778, fought Indian and Briton alike in the Revolutionary War, was elected sheriff in 1782, later to the legislature of the new state of Kentucky. During this time, Boone worked as a land company scout and a land speculator. Speculators gotten a bad knock, but virtually all of the early farmers who could became speculators. They would buy extra plots of land and sell them out because usually the price of that land was rising because more and more people were moving out west, just kind of as they are today. So it's not a negative term the way anti-capitalists always want you to think of it. Drawn into protracted court battles over disputed land claims, Boone went bankrupt in 1798 and then moved his large family to the uninhabited expanses west of the Mississippi River. He died near St. Charles, Missouri in 1820, having spent an eventful 8 decades in the American frontier. During the course of Daniel Boone's life, stories of his exploits spread far and wide, and he became America's first frontier folk hero. Thousands claimed to know the exact spot where Boone carved on a tree, "Here D. Boone killed a bar," B-A-R, meaning bear. Americans have told Boone's stories for more than 200 years, and his legend has appeared in formal artistic works ranging from James Fenimore Cooper's novel, The Last of the Mohicans in 1827, and painter George Couch Bingham's rendering Daniel Boone, 1851, to 20th century movies and television shows, the most famous being Fess Parker's near decade-long 1960s television show as Boone. A little personal note there, in around 2013, I was invited to a barbecue of a number of Hollywood conservatives, back then known as Friends of Abe. And they were still very, and still are today, very afraid to appear in public because they'd be annihilated. Their jobs would be killed. They get no more acting, directing, writing, whatever gigs. So they are very cautious about who they let into their circle. Nevertheless, there were about 2,000 people at this barbecue, which was emceed by Gary Sinise. The musical venue was Big and Rich, the country band. And I saw a whole lot of people there, including my friend John Voight, gave me a big old hug. But one of the people I shook hands with was Ed Ames, who played Daniel Boone's companion in the show Daniel Boone. So that's a little personal note there. It's important to note the symbolic contrast in the roles Daniel Boone takes in the various famous stories about him. On the one hand, he's portrayed as a loner and a misanthrope who longs to escape society and live for years utterly alone in the wilderness. On the other hand, there is the Daniel Boone, who was a husband and a father, founder of Boonesboro, successful politician, real estate developer. This Daniel Boone, another biographer wrote, quote, was an empire builder, a philanthropist known for his, quote, devotion to social progress. Daniel Boone was, above all else, the archetypical American. He loved the wilderness and the freedom that came with the frontier individualism. Like all Americans, he simultaneously believed in progress and the advance of capitalism and Republican political institutions. While he may have sometimes wished that America would always remain a sparsely inhabited wilderness, he knew that America could not and should not stand still. And you might want to see in the sources we reference here, Theodore Roosevelt, The Winning of the West, 6 volumes. Teddy Roosevelt was a great writer, by the way. John Mack Farragher, Daniel Boone, The Life and Legend of an American Pioneer. Now, I recommend Farragher's book on Boone, but I wouldn't recommend his textbook. All right, back to the narrative text. North of the Ohio, a slower pace of settlement took place because of strong Indian resistance. Even there, the white presence grew. Marietta, Ohio became the first permanent American settlement in the region, but soon was joined by Chillicothe, Fort Wayne, and Detroit. Census figures in 1790 showed the non-Indian population at 73,000 Kentuckians and 35,000 Tennesseans, while the Old Northwest, that would be Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, boasted about 5,000. So none of them had the numbers at that time to become a territory, with numbers rising daily. Counting the pre-1790 residents, the combined American population in all areas between the Appalachian Crest and the Mississippi River numbered an impressive 250,000. One traveler later observed, quote, "Old America seems to be breaking up and moving westward. We are seldom out of sight as we travel on this grand track towards the Ohio of family groups behind and before us. Add to these numerous stages loaded to the utmost and the innumerable travelers on horseback, on foot, in light wagons, and you have before you a scene of bustle and business extending over 300 miles, which is truly wonderful." On the eastern seaboard, the Confederation Congress watched the Great Migration with interest and concern. Nearly everyone agreed that Congress would have to create a national domain, devise a method for surveying and selling public lands, formulate an Indian policy, and engage in diplomatic negotiations with the British and Spanish on the Old Northwest and Southwest. Most important, Congress had to devise some sort of territorial government plan to establish the rule of law in the Trans-Appalachian West. Nearly everyone agreed these measures were necessary, but that was about all they agreed to. Western lands commanded much of Congress's attention because of the lingering problem of national domain. The Articles remained unratified because some of the landed states still refused to surrender their sea-to-sea claims of to the central government, and Maryland refused to ratify the document until they did. This logjam cleared in 1781 when Virginia, thanks to Jefferson's influence, finally ceded her Western claims to Congress. Maryland immediately ratified the Articles, officially making the document, at long last, the first Constitution of the United States. Although one state, Georgia, continued to claim its Western lands, the remaining states chose to ignore the problem. Congress immediately set to work on territorial policy, creating legal precedents that the nation follows to this day. Legislators saw the ramifications of their actions with remarkably clear eyes. They dealt with a huge question. If Congress, like the British Parliament before it, established colonies in the West, would they be subservient to the new American mother country or independent? Congress rejected the British model, making the United States the first nation ever to allow for gradual democratization of its colonial empire. I want to underscore this. No nation in history has ever expanded and treated those where it has expanded, that is, those who came within that expansion, as citizens. And we're going to see in just a minute, they are extended full citizenship rights. They're not colonies. The French didn't do this with Algeria. The British certainly didn't do it with Canada, South Africa, India, or any of their other possessions. And certainly the Russians, the Mongols, and the Chinese never even thought about doing something like this. So it's truly remarkable. When you hear people getting on America, America is the world leader in such ideas as individual equality when it comes to the vote. Jefferson, in particular, was concerned that settlers in the new land, unless properly treated and ensured representation, would soon themselves declare independence from their mother country. He wrote the deed that conveyed the Western region to be made into states having, and I quote, the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, and independence, the same as the original 13 states. Again, stunning, amazing. He urged Madison to hurry the bill through the assembly, fearing, quote, the people in the Western territories will separate themselves. In other words, Jefferson said, let's hurry up and make them citizens before they say we want to be an independent country. As chair of Congress's Territorial Government Committee, Jefferson played a major role in drafting the ordinance of 1784. Jefferson proposed to divide the Trans-Appalachian West into 16 new states, all of which would eventually enter the Union on an equal footing with the 13 original states. Ever the scientist, Jefferson arranged these new states on a neat grid of latitudinal and longitudinal boundaries that gave them fanciful, classical, patriotic, and Indian names. Chersonesus, Metropotamia, Saratoga, Assinissippi, and Sylvania. These are the names Jefferson wanted to call these new states instead of Missouri, Oklahoma, things like that. He directed that Appalachian Mountains should forever divide the slave from the free states. A slave owner did this, institutionalizing free soil on the western frontier. Folks, this is just so overwhelming. And these idiots who back the 1619 Project and garbage like this and these race-based crap ideas are clueless as to how far-reaching and advanced in thinking Jefferson was when he set this up. Although his radical idea did not pass in 1784, it combined with territorial self-governance and equality and became the foundation of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the first law in human history that outright banned slavery. How about that? So we're going to stop right there. And when we come back, we're going to read what I think is arguably the most important law in American history. And that would be the Land Ordinance of 1785 that sets up one of the four pillars of American exceptionalism: private property, with written titles and deeds. And it clashes, as we will see, with one of the other pillars, common law. So how did the founders reconcile these two? Got to wait till next time. So I'll see you guys back here Monday. Now, before we leave, a couple of things. As I said, my autobiography is now out. You can see it on Amazon, The Rhythm of History. Check out The Wild World of History and help me turn Patriots history into a video series, folks. Just 2 easy steps. Watch the video trailer. I mean, you're going to cry at the end of this. It's so beautiful. It's so fantastic. The best 4-minute history of America ever filmed. And then buy me a coffee. Help me turn it into the video. We can do this. They did it with The Chosen. They did it on a much lower level with Gosnell. Other projects have been done with crowdfunding. We can do this. Our budget isn't huge. Help me out. Buy me a coffee. And I'll see you guys back here on Monday.